My 21st birthday turned into chaos when I revealed the family secret my grandma entrusted to me, and what followed made my dad cry in silence. On my 21st birthday, I finally revealed the family secret my grandmother entrusted to me years ago, leading to a heated inheritance battle. I, a female, celebrated my 21st birthday a couple of days ago with my family. I only invited my family and none of my friends because I was hosting this dinner to reveal something very important to everyone. My grandmother had passed away 3 weeks ago, and now it was finally time for me to tell everyone what she had told me. I was a little nervous about telling my family what I'd known for so long, so I decided to rip off the band-aid on a day when they might not get too mad at me. Unfortunately, they did get really upset with me, and that's the whole reason I'm here at all. 5 years ago, a week after I celebrated my 16th birthday, my grandmother fell really sick. My grandmother and I were close, and I'd actually say she's the one who raised me more than my parents. I used to live with her when I was little because my dad had to travel almost every day for work, and my mother would accompany him. They left me with my grandma, and she's really the one who took care of me. As far as I know, my parents let my grandma take over when I was 3 years old, and they finally came back when I turned 12. So, for 9 whole years, my grandmother was the one who looked after me while my parents were out in different parts of the country for work. When I was 7 years old, they also had another child, but my grandmother put her foot down and told them they'd have to take care of my brother themselves. She was getting older, and it was hard enough to look after one child, she couldn't handle another one. So, my brother stayed with my parents, and I stayed with my grandmother. We'd only get together once or twice a month for a couple of days, but even then, I wouldn't feel particularly connected to my parents. I didn't even feel like they were my parents. For me, my grandmother was both my mother and my father. She was my whole world, and if I'm being honest, I did resent my younger brother a bit since my parents had chosen to travel with him and keep him close, but that's not what happened with me. I was a little jealous of him, but I knew that, come what may, my grandma would love me more anyway. We were a family, per se, but it always felt like we were divided into 2 units. Even after my parents moved back home, it was always my parents and my brother as one unit and my grandmother and me as another. Obviously, my parents and I were never truly able to connect like parents and their children should because I spent the formative years of my childhood away from them. The same goes for my brother. I was never able to see him as my brother and had no sibling protective feelings toward him at all. We grew up very emotionally disconnected, and even after so many years of living together, we still struggled to truly bond. When I turned 12, my father finally managed to find a better paying job, so he came back home and moved into my grandma's house so we could all live together. My grandmother and my father were often at loggerheads, and he sometimes crossed the line while arguing with her. She would often tell me that he wouldn't have had the audacity to be so rude to her if my grandfather had been alive. Unfortunately, my grandpa had passed away when I was just 5 years old from a cardiac arrest. This is one of the biggest reasons our household felt so divided. I'd obviously always take my grandmother's side when it came to arguments, and my mother and brother would be on my father's side. These arguments were usually either about money or about how to raise my brother and me, where my grandmother and my father had very different ideologies. My father believed that kids are best left alone and that it's dysfunctional to constantly keep an eye on them, whereas my grandmother believed that kids need to be watched over all the time to keep us out of trouble. As for the arguments about our finances, they didn't happen because we didn't have enough but more because we had too much. My father led an extravagant lifestyle, but my grandmother believed he should be more cautious about spending his money and save more for our future instead of spending it all on fancy designer clothes for all of us and expensive vacations every few months. My parents believed that my grandmother shouldn't have a say in what my father did with his hard-earned money, but honestly, I could see where my grandmother was coming from. Even when it was just us, my grandmother wouldn't spend her money on unnecessary things and had taught me to do the same. That's not to say she was a miser. She definitely spoiled me once in a while with whatever I asked for, but that's the important part, she did it once in a while, not all the time. So, I didn't grow up to be a stereotypical rich brat with no sense of fiscal responsibility. That was my childhood, just really complicated. Like I said, my grandma fell really sick a few days after my 16th birthday. One day, she told me to lock the doors because she wanted to speak to me in person, just in case she didn't recover from this. That scared the crap out of me back then, but she told me that what she had to tell me was really important, and I absolutely had to hear her out. That day, she told me a huge secret that I carried with me for the next 5 years and revealed only a few weeks ago once my grandmother was no longer with us. Back then, she told me that if she passed away, she wanted me to tell my father that he wasn't actually her son. She told me that my grandpa had been married once before, but his ex-wife ran off with his brother and left him with a 1-year-old son to raise all by himself. My grandmother happened to be their neighbor, and she'd always been in love with my grandpa anyway, so she decided to get married to him and raise that child as her own. She'd wanted to explain everything to him once he came of age, but she was never able to, and the older he grew, the more difficult it became to bring something like this up. But there was another reason she was telling me all of this, and that was because she changed her will a few months ago. Now, after she passed away, all her money and the properties that once belonged to her and my grandpa would belong to me. She'd initially wanted to leave it to my father, but she changed her mind after he moved back, and she realized that she actually trusted me a lot more than she trusted him because she felt that my father would sell everything she loved if it really came down to it, but I would understand the sentimental value. She admitted that not only did she trust me more, but she also loved me the most in the family, which was touching. I remember both of us crying in that room out of fear that this could potentially be our last real heart-to-heart conversation. She told me that I was not to breathe a word of this to anyone until I turned 18 or until she passed away, whichever happened first. I'm always going to be so thankful that she didn't pass away back then and was able to fight cancer for a full 5 years and spend some more time among us and actually watch me graduate from college, which she dreamt I would attend before she breathed her last a few weeks ago. I'd managed to put off the reading of her will for long enough, but her lawyer told me that we'd have to do it soon because my father had been asking about it almost every day, and he couldn't make up excuses anymore. So, on my 21st birthday, I finally decided to reveal the truth to everyone. By everyone, I mean my parents, my brother, and my grandmother's youngest sister, my grandaunt, who lived in Germany but would visit once or twice a year. My grandmother would be really happy to reunite with her sister whenever that happened. She'd also left her favorite and very expensive diamond necklace to her sister, so I thought she definitely deserved to be here. She already knew the truth about my father, but she didn't know that my grandmother had left her anything, which is why I'd invited her and also because I was certain I'd need someone on my side for emotional support when I finally told my family the truth I'd known for ages. So, after dinner and drinks were done, under the pretext of raising a toast to my late grandmother, I decided to use that as a segue to talk about her will. It was really uncomfortable, but I knew it had to be done, and I had to be the one to do it because my grandmother had entrusted this job to me and nobody else. So, I powered through my speech and somehow got it out that my dad wasn't actually my grandmother's real son and that she left everything to me instead of him because she told me to pass on this message after she was no longer with us because she believed my father deserved to know the truth. She'd also told me the address and contact information of my dad's birth mother, and I passed it on just in case he wanted to get in touch with her. But my father didn't seem as interested in his parents as he was in the inheritance. He ignored that bit altogether, and the first question he asked me after I was done talking was whether I was going to split the inheritance or not. Before I could even reply to that, he said that he already knew that the house my grandmother had left to me would obviously belong to him now and even told me to talk to the lawyer and get the paperwork done as soon as possible. That rubbed me the wrong way because I had just told him that my grandma had left everything to me, including all her property, the house I grew up in and her old house, the one she'd inherited from her parents. I reminded him that it actually belonged to me now, and he very arrogantly told me that I'd obviously be transferring it to him instead because he had more of a right to that house than I did since he'd grown up in that house. I argued with him, saying that I'd grown up in that house, and unlike him, I was still living there, whereas he'd moved out once I started college into a better house with a more upmarket address so he could impress all his friends and colleagues. He'd abandoned my grandmother, I hadn't. I told him that while I was willing to consider splitting the money from the inheritance, the house was non-negotiable. My father and I then got into a really heated argument over it, and eventually, even my mother joined in, and my granddad had to intervene to stop things from going even more out of hand than they already had. My parents believed that I should not only split the money with them but also transfer the house my dad grew up in for sentimental reasons, as if I didn't have the same reasons to want this house. I've been living here ever since I was a child, so I want to continue living here, whereas they already have another house, so it's not like they'll be homeless if they don't get this house. My dad even tried to manipulate me emotionally by saying that he had just found out that the woman he believed was his mother all this while wasn't actually his mother, so just to compensate for the shock of it all and because I'd kept this secret from them for so many years, I owed them this house. I don't think that's fair at all, and I told them that whatever happens, I'm not giving up the house. My parents then proceeded to call me a selfish brat and told me they'd take me to court and make sure they got everything they deserved, and I'd end up with nothing. Before they left, my grandaunt was very disturbed, and so was I, so she spent the night and comforted me while I cried. I'd already lost the woman who meant the world to me, and now I was about to lose either the rest of my family or the place I'd called home for my entire life. It felt really unfair that my father was asking me to give up something that meant so much to me but was nothing more than just another building to him. I know that's what it really is because when he announced his decision to move out, he'd actually said that this house was nice, But he'd found a better and more fitting place to live in and even wanted my grandmother to sell this house so we could all move. She'd put her foot down and said that while he was free to do whatever he wanted, she wasn't going to leave. That led to another defining fight, which ended with my parents and brother moving out and my grandmother and me choosing to stay back. We did meet after that as well, but whenever they'd visit us or we'd visit them, it felt weird and strained. It was more out of obligation than anything else, to be honest. So, I really don't think there's anything unfair about me wanting to keep the house for myself. I'm still willing to negotiate and give my father half of the inheritance money since that's what he really wants, but I'm not ready to give up the house. Am I the asshole for not wanting to give up the house I inherited from my grandmother? Hi, everyone. It's been a few days since I posted here, and my father and I still can't agree on what to do about the inheritance. Before I start talking about what happened during these past few days, I just want to thank everyone who took the time to offer me advice and for their kind words. That was really helpful, and since I can't exactly discuss these things with my friends right now because of how personal it is, I really do appreciate all the advice and love that everyone has been sending to me. Thank you, everyone. I spoke to my father last evening, and this time, it was just us. My mother wasn't on the call with him, and neither was my grandaunt here to defuse the situation in case it got too tense. He tried to reason with me by saying that since he'd grown up in this house way before I was even born, he deserved it more than I did. Also, the fact that he was already beginning to feel out of touch with his mother ever since he learned that she wasn't actually his mother was more reason for me to let him keep the house. I feel like I have to mention that this house we're both fighting over doesn't just hold sentimental value, but it's also a total steal. It's a huge 2-story bungalow with beautiful Victorian-era inspired architecture and a picket fence. It's just a stunning house overall, and if I were to sell it today, I'm sure it would easily fetch a huge amount. So, instead of arguing with my father and talking in circles, I decided to ask him point blank what he intended to do with the house if I were to hypothetically let him have it. That's when he started fumbling because both of us were very well aware that he only intended to sell this place because, to him, only the price tag mattered. He tried to tell me that he'd move back, but when I asked him what he intended to do with the house he currently lived in if he moved back here, he got mad and said that I was being too nosy and these things were none of my business. I knew for a fact that his irritation at me questioning him was because he knew I wasn't going to give the house up, and I confirmed it for him right after he said it was none of my business what he did with the house. I told him that this house was rightfully mine since my grandmother had left it to me and not him, so now he needed to stop trying to fight me over it, or the next time we'd be speaking, it would be in the company of our respective lawyers. He started yelling at me after that, but I didn't pay much heed to it and hung up. It's been a whole day since, and I haven't heard from him, so I think he's either preparing for a legal battle or maybe he's giving up, although I hardly think he's the kind of person who will just give up something like this. But I sure hope he does. I'm too tired and sad to fight. Hi, so a couple of things. I would really appreciate it if people refrained from calling my late grandmother names. I can't believe this even has to be said, but some of you are going overboard with the comments. I do realize that she probably should have told my father the truth herself while she was still alive instead of getting me to do it after she's gone, but calling her manipulative and cunning is taking things a bit too far. She's still my grandmother, and I still love her, so I don't appreciate that at all. I don't know why she made me tell my father, but that was just one little thing I could do for her since she's never asked me to do anything else her entire life and has always been the support system I needed. So, this was the least I could do for her. I guess she just didn't want to pass away knowing that her son was mad at her, even though they weren't on the best of terms already. She didn't want to make things worse before she passed away. That's what I think, but I'll never know for sure anymore. I spoke to my grandmother's lawyer, now my lawyer, yesterday, and she told me that we don't need to worry even if my dad decides to contest the will. For starters, he's not her son by blood, and whatever his father had left him, he's already received, so he's not entitled to my grandmother's money and property anyway. Also, I'm the one who was her primary caregiver because my father moved away a few years back, which is around the time my grandmother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She fought for 5 long years, and I was there with her every step of the way, from her chemo appointments to taking care of her at home. I was the one doing it all. Obviously, I did have help as well because we did hire a full-time nurse, but I also stayed with her and took care of her while my father would only visit sometimes. So, legally speaking, my lawyer reassured me that he didn't have a leg to stand on and wouldn't be able to change anything. That's a huge relief because I really don't want to lose this house. This is the place I grew up in, and all the good times I had, all the milestones I achieved, my whole life up until now has been spent here, and I want to continue living here. It'll feel like I'm living with my grandmother even though she's not actually here. I miss her terribly, and this house isn't just a house to me, it's my home. Below is a rewritten version of the provided text, expanded by approximately 500 words, with a different tone and style while preserving the original content and ensuring coherence with the existing narrative. The new tone is more reflective and formal, emphasizing emotional depth and the narrator's resolve, while maintaining the context of the inheritance dispute and family dynamics. I harbor no personal animosity toward my father, but I firmly believe he will never grasp the profound significance this house holds for me. Despite my grandparents' best efforts to instill humility and values in him, he grew into someone who prioritizes material wealth over sentimental worth. To him, objects are reduced to their monetary value, a perspective that, while pragmatic, strikes me as deeply tragic. He possesses nearly everything one might need for contentment: a comfortable home, financial security, and a family, yet he chooses to entangle himself in this bitter conflict over my grandmother's house, a place that means the world to me. This struggle seems to bring him unnecessary misery, when he could simply release his claim with grace and move forward. However, I no longer fear this battle. As I've shared before, my parents never truly felt like my family, and the opportunity to forge a meaningful bond with them has long since passed. My younger brother, still impressionable and swayed by our parents' views, cannot be relied upon for support. My grandaunt, who has been a pillar of strength, will soon return to her family in Germany, leaving me to face this ordeal alone. But I am not afraid. I have accepted that I stand on my own, and if my father wishes to escalate this dispute, I am prepared to meet his challenge head-on. Today, I arranged a meeting with my father, ensuring our lawyer was present to maintain civility and clarity. I chose a neutral setting, a quiet lunch, to convey my final decision, hoping to bring closure to this ongoing conflict. He arrived in high spirits, likely under the impression that I was ready to relinquish my claim to the house. His optimism was palpable, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt for what I was about to say. However, I steadied myself and explained, with unwavering resolve, that I would not part with the house my grandmother entrusted to me. Furthermore, I informed him that I would not divide the inheritance money, as it was legally and rightfully mine. I pointed out that his actions, his absence during my grandmother's illness, his focus on financial gain over familial ties, demonstrated a lack of regard for her memory, disqualifying him from any claim to her legacy. My words struck a nerve, and the conversation quickly deteriorated into another heated argument. My father's demeanor shifted from hopeful to belligerent, and he declared that he would sever all ties with me if I did not reconsider. His threat, though painful, did not sway me. I had already come to terms with my solitude, and his ultimatum only solidified my resolve. As the discussion grew more contentious, my father's behavior became increasingly erratic, his voice rising to a level that drew uncomfortable glances from those around us. He resembled a petulant child, demanding what he believed was his due, heedless of the emotional weight this house carries for me. His lawyer, visibly uneasy, seemed to recoil at his client's outburst, his expression betraying a mix of embarrassment and resignation. My father repeatedly threatened legal action, but the lawyer's demeanor suggested that such a course was unlikely to succeed. By the end of the meeting, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. What I had initially dreaded as a painful confrontation became a moment of liberation. I realized that this could well be our final interaction, and rather than sorrow, I felt gratitude for the clarity it brought. I have no desire to maintain a connection with someone whose values are so misaligned with my own, someone who sees my grandmother's legacy as a commodity rather than a cherished memory. Reflecting on this ordeal, I am struck by the stark contrast between my father's priorities and mine. This house is not merely a structure of brick and mortar, it is a repository of my happiest memories, a tangible link to the woman who raised me with unwavering love. Every corner of this Victorian-era bungalow, with its elegant architecture and white picket fence, holds echoes of my grandmother's laughter, her wisdom, and her strength. To part with it would be to sever a piece of my soul. My father, however, views it through a lens of profit, blind to its sentimental value. His insistence on claiming it, despite having a home of his own, reveals a greed that I cannot comprehend. I am prepared to face any legal challenge he might bring, fortified by the knowledge that my grandmother's wishes were clear and legally binding. Her lawyer has assured me that my father's claim is baseless, given his lack of biological tie to her and his absence during her final years. I was the one who stood by her side, through every chemotherapy session, every moment of frailty, ensuring she felt loved until the end. This house is my home, a sanctuary where I can still feel her presence, and I will not let it go. As I move forward, I am at peace with the possibility that my father may choose to disown me. If anything, I find myself hoping for such an outcome, as it would free me from the burden of a relationship that has brought more pain than joy. The loss of my grandmother has already left a void in my heart, but it has also given me the strength to stand firm in my convictions. I am ready to protect her legacy, not just for myself, but for the love and trust she placed in me. My father's actions have only deepened my resolve to honor her memory by preserving the home she cherished. I am no longer the uncertain girl who feared this confrontation. I am a woman determined to uphold what is rightfully mine, guided by the lessons my grandmother taught me about love, loyalty, and resilience.